The space between us seemed to shrink, our breathing closer, almost shared. I didn't know what would happen, but I knew I couldn't resist any longer. Something inside me had already surrendered. When he approached, his gestures were slow, smooth, with no rush to move, as if he knew that time was on our side. The soft lights highlighted the contours of his face, the shadow of his stubble, the firm line of his jaw. The delicate touch of his hand on my skin sent a current through me, so light, yet intense. And, as he drew nearer, the silence between us grew denser, filled only with the soft sound of our hearts beating faster, as if we both knew something much bigger was about to happen. There were no words, only the exchange of energy between us, something that intensified without hurry, like water flowing slowly towards the sea. And, at that moment, we both knew there was no turning back. Let me tell you how it all started. It was a hot late afternoon, the kind where the sun slowly says goodbye, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. I was at home on the porch, with the soft breeze caressing my face. The house next door had been closed for months, but something caught my attention. A moving truck was slowly parking at the corner, breaking the silence that had dominated the neighborhood. He arrived, the old ANG0LAN man. I had never seen him before, but I knew he was new around here. The house that was being occupied had seemed empty for so long that all the neighbors had lost hope of anyone moving in. That corner of the street, with its monotonous calm, would be interrupted by a presence I didn't quite understand yet. He stepped out of the truck with a calm walk, as though there was no hurry. His clothes were simple, a yellowish long-sleeved shirt and linen trousers, but there was something in the way he carried himself, something that exuded a serenity that was hard to describe. He didn't seem to care about the other gazes around, nor the noise of the boxes being unloaded. He just observed everything with a calmness that was almost meditative, as if he was part of the moment, without hurry for things to happen. In the first days, my only contact with him was the distant greeting when we passed by the gate of our houses. I looked at him more than once and saw that he was watching me too, but he didn't take the initiative to break the ice. His eyes were deep, as if they had stories to tell, but he didn't rush to reveal them. I had the impression that he wasn't just moving into the house, but into something bigger, more complex, something he might be trying to discover over time. The first conversation happened so naturally that when I realized I was already talking to him without even knowing how it all began. I was going to the small corner shop to buy some things, and he was standing on the pavement, holding a shopping bag, watching the movement of the street. When we passed close, he made a gesture with his head, that type of discreet greeting but full of silent respect. I returned the gesture, and then he said in a soft voice, as if testing my reaction, "Hello, I think I'm your new neighbor." It was a simple phrase, but in the way he said it, with that measured tone, something seemed deeper than just the simple acknowledgement of someone arriving in the street. I looked at him and, without really knowing why, I found myself responding with an unexpected sincerity. "Yes, it seems so. I'm Marcos, and you are?" "Olavo," he said, with a light smile that didn't seem forced. It's nice to know that there are still neighbors willing to talk. That phrase took me by surprise. Something in it made me think that, probably, Olavo wasn't just moving into the house, but into something more. I smiled back, more because of the way he looked at me, as if he were saying something more without actually speaking. In the following days, we started to meet more often. He always seemed calm, not rushing anything. He was never a man of big gestures nor excessive words, but there was something in his presence that made me want to continue talking to him. I didn't know exactly what, but something about that man seemed to pull me in, invite me into something more. Sometimes he would invite me for coffee and I would accept, without hesitation. It was always something simple, a cup of black coffee served on a rustic wooden table on his porch, where the breeze would come in gently. He wasn't the type to rush. Time didn't seem to matter when I was with him. We talked about everything and nothing, the weather, the neighborhood, our lives. He spoke little of himself, but when he did, there was something captivating in his words. He wasn't a man who liked to expose himself, but there was a calm in his voice that transmitted confidence. Each phrase was measured, as if he were choosing his words carefully, and in his stories about Angola, there was a contained melancholy, a homesickness he didn't need to say, but which was evident in his eyes. He spoke about his homeland, about the old times, but without bitterness, only a constancy in his gaze, as if he had already made peace with the past. I listened in silence, absorbing each word, but also feeling something more. It was as if his story were an invitation for me to get closer, for me to share my own memories and feelings. Something in those eyes seemed to invite me to reveal more than I would normally show. It wasn't fast. There wasn't a moment when it happened, obviously, but little by little I allowed myself to be more vulnerable. And then, one evening, the invitation was different. It wasn't just a coffee or a casual conversation. Olavo invited me for dinner. I knew he wasn't the type to rush, and something about that invitation carried weight. It wasn't just any meal. I realized that the moment he looked at me with those penetrating eyes, as if testing whether I would understand what he wasn't saying. When I arrived, the house was more welcoming. The air was perfumed by a simple yet carefully prepared dinner. The atmosphere was lit by candlelight, creating a soft, tranquil mood, but also filled with something more. He was in the kitchen stirring a pot, and when he saw me enter, he smiled, that calm smile, as if nothing was out of place. "Welcome, Marcos," he said in that calm voice, but with something more. There was something in his words that made the air heavier, as if there was an expectation that couldn't be ignored. We sat at the table, and the conversation flowed easily. We talked about everything: life, the city, plans for the future. But something was happening in the atmosphere. Our gazes started to become more intense. The words began to intertwine with silences that said more than any conversation could. When he looked at me again, the distance between us seemed to have shrunk, but in a subtle way, as if time was not a concern for him. He began to observe me more intently, not in an invasive way, but as if he were trying to understand every nuance of what I was saying, every movement I made. And I suddenly realized that he knew exactly how to make me feel at ease, as if he had the power to understand me without me needing to speak. It was unsettling, but at the same time, so captivating. The dinner continued peacefully, but at the end, when he stood up to accompany me to the door, the gesture was different. It was no longer just the simple act of saying goodbye, but something that seemed to carry a silent expectation. I looked him in the eyes, and for a moment, we both stood there, without words, just observing each other. I felt as if time had stopped, as if the future was something that didn't need to be discussed but only experienced. He said softly, almost as an affirmation, "See you later, Marcos." But it wasn't just any goodbye. That phrase was loaded with something more. It wasn't just a farewell. It was a silent promise, a tension that didn't need to be explained. And when he looked at me, I could tell that he knew exactly what I was feeling. It was something that was happening slowly, without rushing to define itself, but becoming more real with each passing moment. I left there with a mixture of feelings. I didn't know what was happening between us, but I knew there was something there, something that went beyond words, something deeper. There was no rush. There was no need for words to define what was being built. We both knew, however, that with each encounter the distance between us shrank, as if with every gesture, every look, we were getting closer to a truth that could not be explained. If you're enjoying the story so far, make sure to subscribe to the channel so we can keep bringing more stories like this. Your subscription helps the channel grow and motivates us to bring even more stories that will captivate you. Let's continue the story. If you're enjoying the story so far, make sure to subscribe to the channel so we can keep bringing more stories like this. Your subscription helps the channel grow and motivates us to bring even more stories that will captivate you. Let's continue the story. I was nervous, more than I would like to admit, when Olavo invited me to his house again. The invitation had a different weight, something I couldn't describe in words, but it was clearly present in the air. The night was soft, with the fresh breeze entering through the open windows, mixing with the warm aroma of the simple food he was preparing. The sound of the leaves swaying in the distance, and the soft candlelight illuminating the room, made everything even more intimate. The atmosphere between us seemed heavier than ever, as if the hours we had spent together up to that point had been leading us to a point of no return. Each of his gestures, each glance, seemed to carry new weight, and everything around us seemed to conspire to make that moment unforgettable. The dinner was simple, but there was a tension in the air that hung between us like an invisible mist. He watched me with fixed eyes as if reading my thoughts, and I felt lost in that silent exchange. The food, which would normally have just been a meal, became a pretext for something deeper that unfolded with each movement. With every word he spoke, a new layer of meaning was added to what was happening. Our gazes met again, and this time, it wasn't just curiosity. It was something stronger, more palpable, a connection that extended beyond the words spoken. The space between us seemed to shrink, our breaths closer, almost shared. I didn't know what would happen, but I knew I couldn't resist anymore. Something inside me had already surrendered. When he approached, His gestures were slow, smooth, with no rush to move, as if he knew time was on our side. The soft lights highlighted the contours of his face, the shadow of his stubble, the firm line of his jaw. The delicate touch of his hand on my skin sent an electric current through me, so light yet intense, and as he approached, the silence between us became denser, filled only with the soft sound of our hearts beating faster, as if we both knew something much bigger was about to happen. There were no words, only the exchange of energy between us, something that intensified without hurry, like water flowing slowly to meet the sea. And in that moment, we both knew there was no turning back. The story between Olavo and me followed its course tranquilly, without hurry, without external pressures. As the days passed, I realized that what was forming between us didn't have the urgency of shallow relationships, nor the anxiety of unrealistic expectations. Instead, there was a natural flow, as if time were an ally. I knew, without needing to say in words, that time was on our side, as if we were living each moment in its fullness, without rushing to reach a destination we didn't even know yet. There was no need to rush what was growing between us. Each exchange of glances, each shy smile, each small gesture became a bond that brought us closer. What had once been a simple casual greeting now carried something deeper, something that transcended what could be explained in words. The touch of our hands when passing a glass, the way he would slightly lean in when listening to me, everything seemed to conspire to create a connection that was being built with the serenity of someone who already knew that there was no need to rush to reach their destination. I didn't know what the future held for us, whether it would be something lasting or just an ephemeral chapter in our lives. However, something inside me, something very subtle, told me that what we were living had more to reveal. It was as if each shared moment was a small discovery, a piece of a puzzle that wasn't complete yet, but was slowly revealing itself. What we were building wasn't just a physical relationship, but a connection that went beyond, a silent complicity full of unsaid meanings. And although I didn't know where this would lead us, there was a silent trust that somehow, the path we were walking together was the right one.
Comment below what you would do in their place. Would you fight it, hide your desires, or give in completely? If you enjoyed it, like and share when no one is looking. And don't forget, betrayal is not subscribing to the channel.